I'm Ashley Michaels, and this is Colorado Point of View. Colorado and the city of Denver in the hot seat this week on Capitol Hill. Denver Mayor Mike Johnston was one of 4 mayors called to testify before the House Oversight Committee because of so-called sanctuary city policies. Now, over the last couple of years, Denver has seen the largest per capita influx of migrants in the country. We're told about 42,000 people have come to Denver over the last decade, and the city has spent $79 million on newcomers since 2022. Things sometimes turned a little bit tense during the 6-hour-long hearing as Mayor Johnston had to explain Denver's policies on immigration.
We are each entitled to our own opinion about what should happen at the border, but that was not the question facing Denver. The question Denver faced was, what will you do with a mom and 2 kids dropped on the streets of our city with no warm clothes, no food, and no place to stay? As mayor, I have to protect the health and safety of everyone in our city.
Well, Johnston's main argument is that other states sent migrants to Denver and the city just did the best it could with the hand it was dealt. He said Denver is a welcoming city, but by definition, not a sanctuary city. Republican lawmakers disagreed.
When you declared your cities sanctuary cities, you did so illegally. Do you understand that?
Respectfully, sir, I would disagree with that. We follow
You're
every
disagreeing
federal
with
law.
the law. It's against the law to give sanctuary to people who have committed felonies, and it's a felony to cross the border legally. You gave sanctuary to people who are here illegally. You violated your oath to uphold the Constitution because of the Supremacy Clause. The laws of the United States take preference. But you didn't do that.
There is, thank you, sir. There's no part of our city law that violates federal law. No part of the practices or services we provided that violate federal law.
Did you personally violate the law then by giving sanctuary? Somebody gave these people sanctuary.
All right, let's bring in our analyst to talk more about this. We have Democratic strategist and senior presidential and gubernatorial advisor Andy Boyan and Republican strategist and director of Advance Colorado Michael Fields. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Let's jump right in. So we're going to talk about some of the other Coloradans that we heard from in this meeting here in just a few minutes. But first, I want to start with Johnston and the city of Denver. Andy, we'll start with you on this one. How do you think it went?
I think it went well. And, best can be expected from Mayor Johnston. A couple of things that were interesting about this. The sort of setting was set up to be against Johnston right away. And so Republicans were aiming for him directly with things like sanctuary city issues, things like criminal and crime statistics, those kinds of things, all of which fell apart quickly because Mike Johnston's a smart guy and realizes very quickly that obviously the stats speak for themselves. Violent crime is down 29% in Denver. We're spending 90% less than we were on migrants when we first took this job. So there's a lot involved here that just doesn't measure up to what Republicans are saying. And so he pointed that out very clearly, consistently, and very properly, respectfully. But the Republicans, I felt like, at least the Republicans on the committee, were more interested in grandstanding and talking about what they're interested in, more so than asking our mayor questions. So at the very end of questioning, really at the end of the day, did they hit the target? I believe they missed it. But they also tried to make a point to Mayor Johnston that really this can't continue. If that's the case, then we have to change federal law. And so if we want to do that, then let's go to the people and do so. But we're not violating any laws right now. So to the extent to which Republicans try to paint him as such, they failed.
All right, Michael, what do you think? How do you think this went for Johnston and the city of Denver?
I thought it was a bad day for Johnston. He was sitting up there defending bad policies. And I think that was what was clear as you had question after question asking what are the current policies in Denver, in Colorado. And basically he came down and said we do not verify immigration status when we charge somebody with a crime. 80% of Americans want people who have violent crimes to be deported if they're here illegally. They're not even verifying that information to start with. And I think that is what would surprise people, but became clear during this hearing that that's what's going on. So I think there's a disconnect. These common sense approaches to how to deal with immigrants, especially violent criminals or repeat felons, that's what they need to focus in on. And so I did see a lack of leadership from Johnston. I would have loved for him to say, you know what, there are a few policies, at least a few in Denver and Colorado that I disagree with, that I think should change. And I'm going to take a leadership role in order to make sure those adjustments happen. He didn't say that at all. He defended the status quo, which is not working. And I think all Americans and Coloradans then see that's the case.
Okay, so some of the toughest questions for Johnston were about how Denver works with ICE to transfer a suspect or a criminal into their custody. And so the city says its policy is to notify ICE of the time and date of a release. ICE can then pick up that person if they choose to do so, but that happens outside of Denver jail facilities. Now, I want to take a look at some video. So we have video from a few days ago from last week. 2 ICE agents were assaulted when a suspected TDA gang member released from the Denver jail tried to run. Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan spent his entire 5-minute time slot during the hearing on this issue. Take a listen.
What kind of notice did you give ICE when you released him?
We gave him notification. I'm not sure how long in advance it was. I do know that.
1 hour.
I do know that there were
1 hour notice, and you released him 5 days ago, right? Why not give him more heads up? We held him 345 days. We can't hold him a second longer. We can't wait for you to come inside the building. We got to let him go, so you have to arrest him in the parking lot. That is how stupid sanctuary policies are and what they mean to the community that you put at risk.
All right, Michael, I'll start with you on this one. What are your takeaways from that exchange?
Yeah, I thought it was a great exchange for showing some of these bad policies, right? And saying this is something that is clearly not working. It's embarrassing to watch a video like this and to see a violent Venezuelan gang member who is released out into the parking lot, into the public, onto the streets. It took 6 ICE agents to try, and one of them gets assaulted. I think you look at that and say, what are we doing? Because of some policy that says we're not going to allow ICE agents into our jails, we're not going to do this the right way. Any person in Denver, anybody in Colorado would look at this and say, the way that you do this is you have somebody handcuffed, you hand them over from the jail to ICE agents, and you deal with it that way. And so this is, another time when you can see that clear. Mike Johnson says that this is the wrong way to do it. It didn't work. We need to change that policy. We should let ICE agents in and have this exchange happen at that time. So I thought this was one of the most telling, out of the 6 hours, this is one of the most telling things to show the failed policies here in Denver.
Andy, I want to hear from you on this. What are your takeaways from that exchange with Jim Jordan?
Well, first of all, I think the congressman had a point, but he's made for TV, so he likes these kind of moments, and he has very little substance to it. No one, first of all, to be clear, wants anybody assaulted or hurt in the process, period. That's not the goal. Mike Johnson, as mayor of Denver, said we gave ICE 1 hour. Okay, so it's not our job as the city and county of Denver to do ICE's job. So we gave them 1 hour notice. They showed up and they apprehended the suspect. So there's a lot of consternation here, and Mike speaks to it in this exchange. But I will say, if you want it different, then change the law. And there's a lot about policy versus law that's important here. And we may disagree fundamentally on how to handle it, but the law is the law. And we follow the law, and there's no equivocation about that. So as Jim Jordan, as he typically does, asks questions and then answers his own question, not allowing the witness to answer. In that exchange specifically, I think Jim Jordan beat up the mayor, and the mayor took it and hit him back, and he should have.
Okay, so Mayor Johnston, not the only Coloradan that we heard from during this hearing. All 4 of Colorado's Republican representatives also got the chance to question Johnston. Now, I think a lot of people were expecting a pretty tough back and forth between Congresswoman Lauren Boebert and Mike Johnston. My question to you both, Andy, I'll start with you. Did she deliver?
She did not. And it was interesting about Lauren Boebert is that she's, she is becoming a congresswoman to contend with, and she has issues that are important to her, obviously. But in this exchange, she didn't do her homework. I felt really consistently throughout her questioning, she really didn't prepare well for this. And she had an opportunity to talk about Colorado. She's from Colorado. She knows Colorado. And she can hit on the warrant issue specifically, which I think is what she hit hard on. But it wasn't inclusive enough to make an argument that made sense. So I think she did about half the job, and the other half was left, obviously, to other people.
Michael, do you agree?
I think 5 minutes is tough for any member of Congress. Mike Johnson is a good speaker. He's able to give his answers in a way that, they had to cut him off and stop him because he's not answering the question. I think that she did bring up a really good point, which was the warrant point, but also kind of what's happening before we get to the warrant stage, right? And that's what we're really been talking about is when somebody's charged, why are we not giving that information, if they're here legally or not, to federal authorities so they can handle it? Andy said we need to, if you want to do it, change the law. That's exactly what we're talking about. Leadership is Mike Johnson, Governor Polis standing up and saying we need to change these laws because letting gang members out in the streets isn't working. Letting people go and having them reoffend time and time again when federal authorities don't even know this is what's going on, that's not working. So I think real leadership is saying, no, we need to change those laws, and I'm going to be a leader and push for it either on city council, through ballot measures, et cetera. That's what's not happening. I do think Lauren Boebert and Jim Jordan and Jeff Crank and Gabe Evans, all of them brought these different issues up. And so I think there was a lack of leadership again from the mayor especially.
And I'm going to ask about those other guys right now. So Colorado's three newest lawmakers, Evans, Crank, and Hurd, they were all waived onto the committee special for this hearing. Now, Evans does cover Adams County, but otherwise they represent areas well outside of Denver. Here's Congressman Evans after the hearing.
Issues that are present in Denver, Colorado, particularly around crime, don't stay in Denver. Quite honestly, Denver is a bad neighbor in terms of public safety for all of the surrounding jurisdictions.
Okay, so I have a different question for each of you. Just a few seconds left here. Michael, I want to start with you. Was this a smart strategy for Republicans to bring the rest of these guys on for this hearing?
Yeah, I think it is, because especially they're freshman congressmen who care about this issue, wanted to make a name for themselves talking. And Johnson's there as the Denver mayor. It was relevant to Colorado. I do think it was smart to bring them on and give them that 5 minutes to question him.
And Andy, my question for you, do you think they should have waived any Colorado Democrats onto this committee?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'd be a fool not to say that. But I would say of everybody from Colorado, Jeff Crank was clearly the most prepared and clearly knew the law and knew what and what was not relevant for the topic. I think Gabe Evans was, I think he gave some time away and it was too bad. I was unimpressed with Gabe Evans. But Jeff Crank knew his stuff and is an impressive congressman.
Well, we could go on and on about this, but we're out of time for this topic. Stay right there, because coming up after the break, we're going to dive into President Trump's speech this week to the joint session of Congress. Welcome back. This week, President Trump gave the first congressional address of his second term. He reflected on changes he's made at the federal level over the past few weeks and hinted at what's ahead. One of the biggest topics, the economy.
If you don't make your product in America, however, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one. Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn to start using them against those other countries.
Canada and Mexico hit with 25% tariffs on Tuesday, although there are reports those may be paused for another month. Still, the president says people should expect, quote, a little disturbance in prices. Here's Colorado Governor Jared Polis's response.
Tariffs are a weak threat because you're basically threatening to stab yourself and say, look, unless you do something, I'm going to stab myself. And, you know, often the countries are going to say, go ahead and stab yourself. And it's not a great game of chicken that the president's playing here.
Quite the analogy from the governor. Let's bring our analyst back in. Okay, so first, I want to get your take just about the speech as a whole that we heard from the president this week. And Michael, we'll start with you. What are some of your key takeaways?
Yeah, I think that it was, you focus on the issues that mattered to people. You talked about the economy is the clip there. Immigration policy, it was the thing that polled the highest in terms of issues that they agree with the president on. It's why we've talked the first half of the show about that issue, because it is relevant right now. Also, government efficiency. I mean, this is where Elon Musk comes in, where we're trying to cut waste and overspending on things. I think that's really important. I thought that it was pretty embarrassing how the Democrats acted, including with Al Green, the representative who ended up getting kicked out. 80% of people are saying this is not the way that you behave during that. Whether it's Republican or Democrat, it shouldn't matter. We shouldn't be doing that. And I think overall, focusing in on those issues that matter, the foreign policy issues, economy, immigration, he took issues that are 70-30, 80-20, and turned that into a speech. And that's why I think you saw those positive responses afterwards.
Andy, I want to hear from you. What are your key takeaways here?
Sure. So one of the things that I noticed by the end of the speech, and I watched the entire thing, was that he didn't really offer any ideas or ingredients for the future. What he did was he relished his election win, which is what got Al Green upset and obviously censured here this week, and should have. I mean, it made some people upset, and it was sort of irrelevant to the situation. But he didn't talk about the price of goods in the grocery store. He didn't talk about the price of gas because he's embarrassed by both. Both of them are up as he took office. Now, we said 2 weeks ago in this show, well, he's been in office for 4 weeks, so is he responsible for the price of eggs? Now he becomes responsible, as Michael said, now he starts to become responsible for the price of eggs as he gets later into his term. So here we go now, we're 6 or 7 weeks in, and he's not talking about the price of goods. The other thing that I think was interesting is that he really didn't talk much about foreign policy. He's very weak on foreign policy. He's not a very great foreign policy president, needs some education on it. And then also finally, the tariff issue, I think it's interesting. Somebody really does need to shake take him now at this point and talk to him about what makes tariffs expensive and who pays those, because he still doesn't get it. He still thinks that tariffs are a punishment on the country that he threatens. But what happens is if you try to buy a Canadian or Mexican product in the United States, you're paying for it. Who else is going to pay for it? So I think the basic essence of tariffs either are not connected with this president or he's incompetent. One of the two. And then the final thing I'll say about the speech is that he really is a very good game show host. So he really does a good job of entertainment, and he does a very good job. That's why The Apprentice won the awards that they did on NBC, because he's very good at being the MC. He's not a great president. And so at the end of the day, people should be nervous. People should be concerned about how we're going, where we're going for the future. And I think that's the message that he left with all of us is take a big gulp, because we're going to see some things change.
Okay, so
not for the better.
We heard what you guys think, but what about voters? So CNN did a quick poll after the speech to see how voters felt about it. About 70% said they felt it was positive. Andy, I'll start with you. Does that number surprise you at all?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because, again, he's 7 weeks into a term, and I think there's not a lot of things he can do right or wrong. And as he said in the speech, there's nothing I can do to get Democrats to clap for me or stand up for me. Well, try being bipartisan. Try saying things that mean things to both parties. Try talking to all of America instead of just your America. But the second thing I think was interesting about the speech is that really it doesn't turn a lot of heads to change any kind of sentiment about the president. So he started with an approval rating that was fairly significant, 51%. He's now staying up there mostly, although he's dropped a couple of points. So I wasn't surprised at all.
Michael, what do you think about those numbers?
I think they're great numbers, right? 70% of people saying that they saw the speech as positive. It's skewed a little bit Republican, the people who watched, but the approval rating being 51% is a solid position to be in, given the fact that he was never there in his first term. And I think part of it was, going after these things like no taxes on tips or overtime or Social Security, things that really resonate with people and really impact their pocketbooks. And I do think that he's more comfortable than ever as president, right? That he's been there for 4 years. He's up there giving speeches. And when people watch and actually listen to what he says and see it in that long form, it's like, you know what? I agree with it more than I disagree with it.
Okay, so one of the most viral moments of the speech that you both brought up was not anything that the president said. It was when a Texas Democrat was escorted out of the House chamber for protesting. Now, we saw others holding up signs in protest of the speech as well, and several more lawmakers walked out while the president was talking, including Colorado Congressman Jason Crow. Now, he said that he walked out because he felt like the president was lying when he talked about crime and the immigrant community in Aurora, Colorado. What do you each make of this response from Democrats? I know, Michael, you already touched on this a little bit, but when we break it down a little bit further, I mean, is this right?
I just don't think it's impactful. These look like stunts, things that are going on. And Republicans have done it in the past where they yelled something out. I think the difference here was Al Green was somebody who was standing up and wanted to get kicked out, right? He was going to keep talking until they escorted him out. He wanted to get attention. I just don't think that the average American really cares about that or is going to respond in a positive way. The way that you win in politics is winning on the issues, go win elections, don't lose, and you have that position where you're speaking instead. So I don't think that it's good. I think it's bad for, kind of what's going out there in the rest of the country where there's partisan, people are attacking each other, people aren't getting along. Let's at least be respectful of people, let them speak, and then afterwards you have all the cameras in the world to go say what your view is and why you disagree with that person.
Andy, is this a bad look for Democrats?
I don't think so. I mean, I think a couple of years ago we had pictures of our own Lauren Boebert and Martin Taylor Greene screaming at the president. So I find it comical that Michael's saying let's be respectful when he's got members of Congress screaming at President Biden. So I think at the end of the day, it happens in both situations. I understand that. I think what Al Green was doing was not trying to get on TV. I think what he was saying was you're a liar, and I won't stand for it, and I'm going to protest for it. And in a democracy, that's healthy. I mean, Michael and I are both instructors in college, and we tell our students all the time that democracy is healthy because of dissent. And I think what Al Green was talking about was dissent and dissension. He wasn't looking to try to get kicked out. I think what he was doing was saying, you're not telling the truth, sir. And he holds the office of the presidency. So I agree, he is deserving of respect. But at the end of the day, when you've had enough, like Al Green has had enough, both from his first term and his second term, I think he has every right to stand up and say, sir, you're not being truthful. And that's what he was saying.
Okay, so one of the other big talking points from the president this week is Ukraine, and it's exposing a deep divide among voters. So let's get to a new poll from Emerson College. It shows Trump's approval rating is flat, the disapproval rating rising a percentage point to 43%. But I want to take a closer look at how people see his handling of the war in Ukraine. 73% of Republicans say he's doing a good job. 76% of Democrats say he's doing a bad job. So people are pretty divided on this. Now, we don't have it on this graphic, but another one of the the questions asked voters, do you feel like there is going to be a world war sometime in the next 4 years? That would obviously be under a Trump presidency. So my question to both of you, have about 30 seconds each. Is he ready to be a wartime president? And what do you make of those latest numbers? Michael, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think he's trying to avoid that right now. Obviously, he's trying to end the war in Ukraine. It was Russia's fault to start with, but we are where we are right now. How do we end that? How do we stop losing lives and spending as much money as we do? I don't think that there's going to be a world war coming up, and I think part of it is Russia has been, put a stalemate here in Ukraine and isn't moving forward. And so I think, this is one where everybody knows that Trump will respond if we're under attack. Our allies are, and so I think that strength will prevent that from happening. But there are dangers in the world. We have to hold people accountable. We have to be honest about who the bad guy is in that situation. In this situation, it is Russia. But I do think it is something people are scared about because foreign policy is a big issue. There is a lot going on across the world.
Let's give Andy the closing word.
So I guess I'm surprised that we're talking about President Trump here, who has decisively gone for pro-Putin policies since he was in his first term. So of course he's going to take Zelensky apart in the Oval Office when it's a very public setting, and of course his sidekick J.D. Vance sits there and does the same. So I think what's interesting is they picked on Zelensky in the Oval Office, but at the end of the day, he's trying to bring peace. He's also trying to win the Nobel Peace Prize, so he can put up on his mantle. I understand that, but at the end of the day, really, is there going to be peace by yelling at Zelensky? No. Is there going to be peace by doing a mineral deal? Potentially. No World War III, nothing like that's going to happen. We're also the only world superpower, really, in reality. We really are the only superpower that can ever do this. So no one's really going to challenge the United States. And I say that proudly as a United States citizen, but I also say it as a reasonable thing to respond to if people are worried about World War. That's just not going to happen here.
All right. Thank you both for the conversation. As always, we'll be right back. Denver restaurant owners who support the state bill to give all tipped restaurant workers the same minimum wage say they're being harassed online by those who oppose it. Denver, Edgewater, and Boulder County have minimum wages higher than the rest of the state. That means tipped workers in Denver make a minimum of $15.79 per hour. The bill would put all tipped workers across the state at a minimum of $11.79. The bill would put all and 79 cents. And this isn't an attempt to give restaurants some relief. State representatives told us a flyer was distributed around the Capitol, though, targeting business owners who spoke out in support of the bill. Business owners also tell us people are review bombing their Yelp pages with bad reviews. State representatives now calling out whoever made those flyers.
It's really sad that, we have to not only try and take on this fight for the future of our restaurant industries alone, but we're also being thwarted by the people who should be defending the economy of our city, which is obviously in deep trouble.
Well, the bill is far from a done deal. The measure is still heading to another committee before the rest of the legislature can even consider it. Well, that's all for this week on Colorado Point of View. Thanks for joining in on the conversation. We'll see you right back here next week.